and you can start whenever you're ready.
Perfect. So hello everyone, my name is Amber Gilgan and I am final year law student in NUI Galway. I have chosen to do my research topic on marine protection legislation, particularly in relation to the European Union. So I chose to do this topic because I was interested in researching just how effective marine protection legislation is in Ireland and the EU, and what is actually being done to implement these regulations. So in relation to getting a better understanding of the topic, it is important to first see where Ireland stands with protecting marine life and habitats, and to also see how long the EU has had regulations in place in attempts to protect its seas. So it's also important to try to get an understanding of the developments being made in this area and what exactly is being done to conserve the lives of marine creatures. And then as well, the challenges we face with protecting these animals and what the future holds. So slide 3 there, you can see that starting in Ireland, there are 3 main pieces of legislation that govern the protection of animals, including marine animals. Firstly, the Protection of Animals Act 1911 relates to the offence of cruelty, and it states that if anybody kicks, beats, causes them suffering, administers any poisonous drugs to an animal, etc., they should be found guilty of an offence of cruelty within the meaning of this act, and they will be liable to a fine or imprisonment. Further, this act also covers the reasonable duty of care of owners to provide adequate protection for their animals. So an issue with this act is that although it highlights the government's concern for animals, the act only applies to domestic animals alone. So it wasn't until the Whale Fisheries Act of 1937 that the government extended such protection to that of marine life. This act was also only applied to baleen whales under subsection 2. However, it also states that the minister may at any time make an order to modify this act in respect of any kind of whale. So slide 4 then talks about the classification of what types of whales are protected under this act. So it's covered in section 4, subsection. It is illegal to kill or to take or attempt to kill or to take a right whale, which is a baleen whale, and an immature whale or a female whale, which is accompanied by a calf or a suckling whale. So if anybody acts in contravention of this section, they shall be found guilty of an offence under this section and will be penalised with a fine of up to £500, imprisonment of up to 6 months, or both. So one exemption may be in relation to the catching of whales for scientific purposes, which is also covered in the Act, and it may be allowed if permission from the Minister has been granted in writing. So an important feature of this Act is the policy in place in which records have to be kept at factories in relation to the capturing of whales. The information needed for records includes the number of whales at the factory, the date, place of capture, the species, the sex, and also the length of the whales. In order to ensure that this Act was followed in Ireland, there were sea fisheries protection officers employed, which was covered by section 21 of the Act. So these officers had a right to order for a ship to be stopped for identification procedures. They could board the ship, they could ask for licenses and other paperwork regarding the ship, they could search the ship, and this also applied to the factories in which an officer may have believed there to be captured whales. So although this Act may have encouraged the protection of whales, it was still only one type of whale that was under government protection in Ireland until the Wildlife Act of 1976. So this Act was introduced by the Oireachtas, which protected certain wildlife and flora in Ireland, and under section 23 of this Act, marine mammals such as dolphin species, seal species, and whale species are protected. Under the amendment in 2000, protection was broadened to include most species that were excluded in the 1976 Act. So moving on then to talk about the marine protection legislation and the European Union standing. The EU Habitats Directive is of high importance to every member state within the EU as it relates to the conservation of threatened animal and plant species. A directive is a legislative act that essentially sets out a goal that all EU countries must achieve. However, it's up to the EU countries themselves to devise their own laws on how they can reach these goals. So under this particular directive, the member states must report to the EU Commission about improvements that have been made regarding the Habitats Directive. The main reason for reporting is to try to capture the status and trends of each species. So the EU also has what is known as a European Red List, which is basically a review of the status of species within the EU that identifies those who are facing the threat of extinction in order for suitable conservation measures to be taken to improve their status. It's clear that this directive encourages the member states to actively partake in conservation means in order to keep up developments in all areas of species protection. Moving on then, you can see that looking to recent developments in the area of marine protection, the European Commission's Marine Strategy Framework Directive was adopted in June 2008, and its main aim was to achieve good environmental status of the EU's marine waters by 2020. In looking at whether this has been successfully achieved, A report by the Commission in June of 2020 noted that the challenges still remain and member states actually need to step up action to protect the seas and oceans. So in Ireland in 2018, a marine protection motion was held by Senator Grace O'Sullivan, in which she hoped to tackle Ireland's failure to protect oceans and seas around the nation. Grace O'Sullivan's speech in the Shannon that day was quite inspiring, and she really focused on the importance of protecting the seas and basically leaving the seas alone to allow them to recover themselves. She also shed light on the issue of sound pollution, which before conducting my research, I personally didn't know about how damaging such a thing could be to the sea, and in particular to whales, as it contributes sadly to strandings and mortalities. So the sound pollution is it's done in a way of sonic booms. So they are used to probe the seabed for exploration of fossil fuels. So she also spoke for support for the work of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and believes that it's the best way to support marine areas under pressure. Alongside Grace O'Sullivan's concern for Irish seas and the damage being done to them, there are conservation projects within Ireland which aim to help marine life when human activity like sound pollution begins to affect the animals. So one particular development in this area is the establishment of the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group. The Irish Whale and Dolphin Group have schemes in place for reporting sightings and strandings of whales and dolphins, which contributes to the data being collected to help get a better understanding of how these animals are or are not affected by human activity. Although these developments in marine protection bring hope to the issue, there are still major issues that need facing, the act of whaling being one of them. So you can see there that whaling is defined as the occupation of killing whales and extracting commercial products from them. So whales are being killed for their meat and blubber, with the Japanese nation contributing largely to the consumption of this meat. There has been a downfall, though, in the demand for the demand for the meat from Japan, though, since like 2019. The Natural Resource Defence Council had an informative webpage discussing the act of whaling and its history, which also touches on the issue of the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Norway all continuing with whaling, despite the International Whaling Commission's ban on whaling. So in 1995, an International Whaling Commission was held in the Shannon, in which Miss Madeleine Taylor Quinn spoke of the importance of using this convention to publicly condemn the Faroese government for the manner in which the whale hunting kill is carried out. The Faroe Islands are a group of tiny islands between Norway and Iceland that allows for whale hunt and killing for food purposes. The Faroe Islands are a part of Denmark where whaling is illegal. However, they are independently governed. Therefore, whaling remains legal there to this day. So in 2018, images surfaced of the event and disturbed many viewers. These images represent how it's considered to be a community activity which is open to everyone and is regulated by laws, with even children participating. A shocking news article from the BBC told the story of Alistair Ward, a student in Cambridge University who witnessed the local whale driving themselves and took images of the violence. He was disturbed by what he witnessed and the methods of whale killing, stating that the squealing from the whales was horrible as they hacked them with knives. I found it to be an image that was a huge eye-opener to me, having looked at the efforts conservation programs and also member states have gone to ensure the protection of these animals. So to conclude, in answering the research question on whether we are doing enough, I believe that although many member states of the EU are trying to impose strict following of the directives, these endangered marine life species still remain at risk of extinction due to the actions of humans. Therefore, we're not doing enough in order for it to be as effective as it could be. The European Union has in place probably the most effective marine protection legislation in the world. However, the issue of pollution is probably the biggest downfall. And with member states implementing tighter legislation around pollution and bigger penalties, it could potentially help with the issue. There is room for member states to do more individually, be it introducing newer legislation and concentrating more on raising awareness of the issue, having more resources available for effective conservation of the seas to be carried out. And there is a need for more funding from member states to put into these projects in order for them to be successful. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll answer them to the best of my ability, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Amber. I'm just going to stop the recording before people ask their questions.